Good morning, guys. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we are going to dive through a topic that is one of my favorite topics this time of the year in the winter, and that's cold water jerkbait fishing. Today, we're going to dive through what bait to pick, how to make sure it's getting the action you want, what is the action you want, how to alter it, how to choose the color, what to do if you go deeper, shallower, so on and so forth. So if you'd like to dive down the rabbit hole of cold water jerkbait fishing, let's have some fun. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle.
Oh, what a stud.
Yeah. Look at that.
That was sick.
Woo!
Cheers, my friends. Happy Sunday. All right, guys, some breaking news. What's new this week at the Hookup Tackle?
What a beautiful post-spawn fish.
Look at that.
Look at that gut on that. That's a nice fish.
Welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being joined this freezing cold winter morning by my buddy Jeffrey the King. Jeff, you're shaking your head.
It is cold,
you're
man.
sick and tired of this cold already.
No, I love it.
You are weird.
I love this cold,
Let's
man.
bring the summer back.
No,
Yes.
I'd rather have this than 120.
No way.
At least I'm not sweating.
This is terrible. Who cares if you're sweating?
I
I love
stink.
sweating.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you do stink, though.
When it's hot.
You should
right?
drink beer.
Got it.
That's salsa.
Okay.
I hope you guys are having a great day. Today we are diving down the wintertime cold water jerkbait rabbit hole. And we talk about jerkbaits a lot, so I'm not going to bore you with too much of the same information that we talk about all the time. I really just wanted to kind of do a refresher on cold water jerkbait fishing, because even though a lot of the baits are the same that we throw in the winter versus when they move up to pre-spawn versus post-spawn versus summer, there are still some little tips and tricks that we can change our cadence, change the retrieve, change some colors, do some different things to entice more strikes in the winter time. So, throwing a jerkbait is one of my favorite things to do in the cold water. It's just a way of fishing that speaks to me. And I think that this time of the year, I think maybe Jeff would attest to this, or maybe you'll disagree, but I think this is one of those times of the year where you could actually catch fish on a ton of different techniques. I think there's a lot of things that you can do right now to catch fish. And that water gets cold, it's really about fish placement and how they're set up and the angle that you're choosing to fish for them at. And you could choose a jerkbait, a spinnerbait, a jig, a soft plastic, a glide, a swim bait. Like, there's a lot of different choices out there. Jerkbait fishing is just one of my favorite ways to do it, because it's kind of up to us what this bait is going to do, how fast it's going to go, how slow it's going to go, how long the pauses are, how deep it's going to be, how shallow. All of these are kind of up to the angler. So every angler can kind of put their own little spin on it, and you're really working for every bite versus something like a spinnerbait or a crankbait where you're just kind of throwing it out there and the bait is doing all the work and you're just kind of winding it from away from you to you, right? So that's why I love jerkbait fishing, and there are times when this is just a killer bait this time of the year as well, especially when they are either suspended or they are relating to eating bait kind of mid-column, right? So let's start diving in, okay? Well, I'm gonna make this as quick as possible so it's painless for Jeff and he can go back and enjoy his cold water, and I'm gonna warm up. Okay, here we go. We're gonna start right here. Vision 110. Now this is kind of the staple, I would say, in everybody's jerkbait box. So this is just gonna kind of be a ground zero for us, right? So let's talk about this bait really quick. The Vision 110 is 110 millimeter half ounce jerkbait. It is technically a slow floating jerkbait, even though if you look on the package it says suspending. This is a bait that is very, very specific to water temp to when it suspends. And if you get just a degree above or a degree below that water temp, then it changes the suspendability of this bait. Now I would say for the majority of times, probably 9 times out of 10 that I throw this bait, it's more of a slow floating jerkbait than a true suspending jerkbait. Okay, and this is important to know because when you're fishing in the winter, usually the water is colder. You're usually in the 50s or 40s or sometimes even in the 30s, right? The fish's metabolism really, really slows. Now, it doesn't change the fact that they need to eat. They need to be safe. They're going to do all the same things that they've been doing all year, except they're going to be on a much slower pace to, you know, what they were doing in the fall. In the fall, they're super aggressive. They're really nice and comfortable. The food was aggressive. You know, now everything is cooling off. And once that water starts to crack into the low 50s, the shad start dying off. They start getting very cold. So instead of them just being in these big wads and just swimming really fast, they're going to start kind of breaking up and kind of just moving really tight, shorter little bursts, right? If a couple shad get away from the school and the school kind of moves out here and these guys were too slow, you're going to have random little individual things moving around. Everything's just kind of moving at a slower pace, right? So I like to imitate that slower pace with my jerkbait cadence this time of the year, and I like to put really long pauses on. So in the fall, if you guys were on a really hot jerkbait bite in the fall and your cadence was, you know, kind of 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, pause, and this thing was just, you know, left, right, up, down, right, boom, boom, and you're just moving around really fast. You could try that, but chances are that's going to be too fast of a cadence, right? Remember, these fish are slow, their metabolism is down. Once you kind of get the bait out of their strike zone, they're not really going to run and chase it down. So you need that bait to stay around that fish in the strike zone for as long as possible to make sure you're maximizing your chance for those fish to come in. So really what I mean, kind of my starting point this time of the year for cadence is kind of a twitch, and then I'm going to just let that thing marinate there for a long time. 15 to 30 seconds probably would be pretty normal. Sometimes I'll go 45 seconds a minute. Like it's long, sometimes it's painful. Like you're just literally twitch, and you're just letting it sit there. And what you're hoping for with the 110 is you're hoping that bait is going to kind of do this dart, and then it's always kind of in a nose down position, right? So you're kind of doing this dart, and then on that pause, if it's slow floating, it's going to very naturally kind of quiver its way up. So it's almost like a Senko. You know, when you throw a Senko out and it kind of has that really slow quiver down, it's very similar to that, only the opposite direction, and it's going to slowly work itself up. Now, you're going to have to pay attention to how fast this is floating or sinking, depending on what your water is doing, or truly suspending. But I like the 110 as a starting point this time of the year because I find that when that bait is sitting in this kind of nose down position, the fish, when they suck it in, they're going to get the head of the bait, which is what I prefer. If they're eating it here from the front, chances are they're gonna get 2 hooks, okay? If they're looking at it from back here and they suck it into the back and they just get that 1 back hook, now you've just got 1 hook, plus you have all the leverage of the front of the bait to kind of pull it out as you're fighting. But if it's sitting like this and those fish suck here, the leverage of the bait is kind of in the mouth or on the head or attached to the fish and not separate from the fish. So I find that my land ratio goes way up when I can get them to eat the front of the bait. Okay, so long pauses, and I want this thing to very, very slowly float back up if possible. Now, there's a lot of things you guys can do to alter that. If it's floating too high, you might have to change the gauge of your hooks. That would be where I would start. I don't like to put a lot of strips or like lead weights on my 110 because it really changes the movement of the bait. But what I will do is if it's floating too high and I want it to have a little slower float or more of a true suspend to it, I'll just change that front hook usually to a size 5. Now this comes with size 6 trebles on it. So you could just go to like any size 5 treble will work. And I usually just change the first one, just the front one. So that'll keep that little extra weight here in the front, which will aid in making sure that it's staying in the position that it's designed to be, which is nose down, tail up. Okay. If you need more weight, then I'll put a 5 here as well. And if you need more weight still, you can go 5s across the board. Now, depending on the hook you use, if the shank is too long, sometimes the 5s will wrap around. So it's one word of caution. So I usually like to start just fresh out of the box, just go with the 6s and see what it does. And then add 1 treble at a time if I need to just increase the weight. Just that little bit of weight difference can make a big difference in the suspendability of this bait. Now, as far as hooks go, I want to stay in something light wire. Now, these Katsuwagi outbarb trebles, super light wire. Okay, so you'll hear a lot of people that say, oh man, I love those hooks, they're so sticky. And then you'll hear a lot of guys say, man, those hooks suck. They bend out and break first time I cast or catch a fish, right? Once you understand what these hooks were designed to do, then you can understand what you need to do with the bait. So the Ito Vision 110 is designed to throw on 8-pound. Okay, so these hooks were designed to throw on 8-pound. So once you go bigger than 8-pound, if you go to 10-pound or 12-pound line, you're overpowering the bait and the hooks. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it. I almost always throw it on 10 or 12-pound through most of the year, probably 3/4 of the year. But knowing that, if I'm leaving the Katsuwagis on there, I just have to chill out a little bit. Got to back the drag down a little bit. I got to fight them a little bit easier. I can't be horsing them in because I've got too much leverage for something that's so light wire. Okay, so if I'm swapping the hook, I'm staying in a light wire, Owner ST36, Ryugi pierced, but the Dagger, so that's the lighter wire one. You want that lighter wire this time of the year because almost always you're going to be throwing this on light line. Now, I understand there's a lot of different types of fisheries, and I'm going to talk about some shallower vegetation type fishing. So if you guys are in Florida and you're like, well, dude, I'm fishing in 4 feet of water or 5 feet of water. I'm not throwing 8-pound and letting it sit there for 2 minutes. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Okay. What I'm talking about right now is your traditional bass fishery, your traditional reservoir, where you've got deeper water, you have points, you have bluffs, you have deeper water, you have channels. Stuff that the majority of us are fishing. I will start with 10-pound on this guy, but I find that in the winter, I drop to lighter sizes a lot. 8-pound, 7-pound, 6-pound. Sometimes I'll even go down to 5 or 4. So just keep in mind that if you're going to go this light, it might be better to throw this on a spinning rod instead of a casting rod. Okay, because a spinning rod's just going to have a much better drag system on it, so you're going to be able to fight a big fish much better. But you're just going to have to use what you have confidence in, but don't be afraid to drop down in line. I'll do that for a couple different reasons. One, I might need it to get a little bit extra depth out of it. The other reason is when that bait is sitting there for such a long period of time, those fish get a really good look at it. So they are really staring at this, and I would rather have 6-pound or 7-pound coming off than 12-pound coming off. It's just, in my head, it's getting me more bites, it's less visible to them because it's thinner diameter, and it's giving the bait a little bit of different action, okay? So, before we get off the 110, let's talk colors really quick. So, for me, wintertime, the staple, I want something white, I want something dark, and I want something matte. Okay, those are kind of my 3 main things. So if it's a sunny day and the sun is out, I'm usually throwing something white or something dark. Okay, if it's a cloudy day or it's early in the morning, I'm throwing something dark or something matte. Okay, that pretty much everywhere I've been around the country is a pretty good way of doing it. Now, of course, you have to adapt to your body of water. If your water is a little muddier, then dark for you might be gold, right? Or like a perch type pattern. If your water is crystal clear and super high skies, then you might need something super transparent, right? But what I find is even in our clear water in the winter, the sun is at such a low angle this time of the year. It's not like in the summer where it's directly overhead. It's really low in the horizon. So even in the middle of the day, there's lots of shadows. The water is darker. The light is kind of coming at an angle, and it's creating a different atmosphere subsurface even in clear water. So this is when colors like a GG Deadly Black Shad or a Wakasagi type color, this is when these really can be effective because it's just a darker profile. It's just darker, it's easy for them to see. White is always a great option. I mean, there's a reason why GP Stain Reaction with an orange belly won back-to-back classics in February, because white is just a killer color. If they're feeding on any type of shad, white stands out. It's easy for them to see. It's just a great all-around color. And then matte finishes are crucial for me on cloudy days, on days where it's maybe calm, but not a lot of light penetration. Matte finishes really kind of have kind of a glow or a hue to them, okay? So if you're looking for a starting point, white, matte, dark, that's what I do. As far as do I throw the regular, do I throw a +1? It's personal preference. So I pretty much live on the regular. I very rarely throw a +1, just my personal preference. What I find is that I can get the regular down to, 5, 6 feet. This guy might get down to 8 or 9 feet, but I've never known if a fish is suspended in 15 feet of water, it's off the end of a point, it can see a bait in 6 feet the same as it can see a bait in 9 feet. It's just gonna come eat it if it wants it. That's my way of thinking on this. But there's no right or wrong. I mean, I guess there is. It's wrong if you're not catching anything, and it's right if you're catching them, okay? So whatever you have confidence in, and you guys can play with the junior version as well. +1 junior I know is a super popular one. So, just mix and match what you like. But there's kind of the breakdown on the 110. Now the other bait that will go for me kind of hand in hand with a 110 this time of the year is the pointer 100. Okay, so I like a pointer 100 in a couple different situations. The first situation is if it's a really windy day, if it's one of those nasty winter days where it's just cold and blowing and there's just a lot of noise happening in the water, I prefer to throw a pointer 100 over an Edo Vision 110. It's just personal preference. The reason for that is it's a louder bait and it moves wider. So when I hit it, and I hit it maybe a little bit more aggressively than a 110, this bait will kick a little bit harder. A lot of times if you're in a boat and it's windy and it's wavy and you're kind of moving up and down, with a 110 you're trying to just tap the slack all the time. So you're trying to use a little more finessey twitches with it. A lot of times if the boat's coming up, it's coming down, even if you're trying to be finessey, you almost have to hit it a little harder to pick up the extra slack. And this bait just responds better to more erratic twitches, harder, softer, harder, softer. It's a little more forgiving for me. Color wise, I stay in the same, something white, something matte, something dark, right? I mean, pretty simple. So, some type of white pattern, some type of matte finish, and then some type of dark finish. Now, the other time I will throw a pointer 100 over a 110 is when I need this bait to marinate for a super long time. And I need it to suspend and just stop and stay there. And this is really, the fish are telling me this, right? You have to pick something. There has to be a starting point. So pick whatever your confidence is and start there. And then pay attention. If you have live scope, you can watch the fish reacting to your bait. If you don't, then this is the time of the year where your eyes need to be watching your bait as it's getting close to the boat and see if there's a fish following it, how close is it, how far is it, what is it doing. You're trying to learn behavior and gauge what type of activity level they're having towards your bait. The pointer 100 will suspend much truer than a 110. The pointer 100 also sits horizontally. Okay, and this can make a difference sometimes, and this is where bass get so confusing to me, right? Their brain is this freaking big, but some days they want the bait to be head down, and some days they won't touch a bait that's head down. It has to sit horizontal. I don't know why. I just let them tell me what they want, right? So if they want it horizontally, then I switch to a pointer 100. So if this is the time of the, if it's the time of day where they're just not aggressive at all, and I know that there's some boulders off this point, I'm gonna just get it to those boulders and I'm gonna twitch it real hard and then I'm gonna pop it. I'm just gonna let it sit there for as long as it takes until something eats it. This would be the bait I would do it because I know it's gonna stay down there and it's just gonna sit there right? And those fish are gonna stare at it. And remember, there's always kind of pulsing under the water. There's some movement under the water from the lake, right? So that bait is still going to have a little bit of movement to it, but it'll just stay put. Now, one thing that I will do to a Pointer 100 a lot is I will add feathers to it if my pause is really long and I notice that I'm getting a lot of followers. So if I'm you know, working this to the boat and I'm seeing that there's fish following it, but they're not totally committing to it, then I'll add a feather either to the front or the back. Now, if I'm seeing that fish are following it from behind, I add the feather to the back. If I'm seeing that there's fish underneath the bait, but they're just not coming up and eating it, I'll add the feather to the front. That's the way I've always done it. Again, it's right if they're eating it, it's wrong if they're not eating it. So, feather hooks come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, whatever. I keep it pretty simple, okay? I usually just do white or black. But if you want to mix in a chartreuse or a red or whatever, you can. There's a bunch of good options. Owner makes a good one. Gamakatsu makes a good one. Megabass makes a good one. I've been throwing a lot more of the Ryugi, actually. So historically, I've always thrown the Megabass and the Owner. And these are great ones that have both a combination of feather and like some tinsel to them. So you get a little bit of flash, a little bit of, you know, shine and feather. The Ryugis don't have the tinsel, they're just feather. So if you need to be a little more subtle, a little more finesse, what happens, and the reason why I add a feather, if you put a feather on the back of this treble, when this is sitting there still, that feather starts opening up and it starts breathing. And it gives the bait some life and some movement while it's dead still. And then when you twitch it again, the feather collapses and then it starts opening up again and kind of breathing underwater. And it's just, you know, if you look at any fish underwater, a bluegill, shad, whatever, you know, they're still a lot. Like they're just sitting there, right? But when they're sitting there, their fins are kind of moving, like they're still kind of positioning themselves, even though their body isn't physically moving left, right, forward, whatever, but there's still some little subtle movements. And that's what I think that feather just kind of triggers something in the head, like it's sitting still. Oh yeah, it's moving a little bit. Yeah, there's some life there. Boom, eat it. Okay, so that's a little tip there. But the Pointer 100 is a great one. Really, for me, they're kind of hand in hand. Okay, so let's keep going down the rabbit hole. Okay, the other type of bait I'll throw, and again, I'm still staying on kind of traditional, you know, bigger reservoir stuff, would be more of like a sweeping style bait. So historically, this has been a bait like a Staysee. Lots of good options in this category. Again, colors, I'm keeping it pretty much the same. It's gonna be a trend for me. You know, something white, something, you know, matte, something dark. If you wanna try something other than a Staysee, OSP has a new Asura EX DR. It's kind of designed to get in that, you know, 12 to 15 foot range like a Staysee. You could throw a 110+2. The 110+2 could be used as a sweep bait. It could also be used in a jerking type motion. So if you need to get the bait down into 14, 15 feet, if they really want it close to the bottom, on the bottom, if you need to tick the tops of like some tree tops that the fish are suspended in, then I'll go to the +2 for depth control. But that's really the only time I'll throw the +2. This isn't one that I want to be just kind of suspending in open water, because it's a little harder to get to work as easy as the regular 110 or the +1. But when they need that bait in that specific zone, it's a critical one to have, okay? So with this style bait, this is something more that I would fish more on like a bluff bank, cliff wall. Something like a little bit steeper where I might be paralleling and I want to get the bait down, you know, into 10 foot, 12 feet. And so I'll wind it down, get it down there. And then usually I'm just kind of sweeping it and pausing, right? And that Staysee is just swimming down and then kind of pausing. And it's truly suspending down there, okay? And I can work in some twitches and some jerks. And you can just do this hybrid of, you know, kind of sweep, twitch, twitch, let it just pause down there and marinade. And it's a great bait when those fish are suspended off bluffs, cliffs, open channels, that kind of stuff. It's not nearly as fun to throw as a regular jerkbait, because if you get this thing in there and you're really hitting it hard, a lot of times because that lip is wider, it'll do weird things and the line will wrap on the hook. So this is more of a crankbait jerkbait hybrid. It's more of a sweeping motion. So for me, it's more a specific use. I need that bait on that deeper type bank or offshore, you know, above trees where they're just suspended out there. But it can be a critical bait when you need that depth. So there's another option. All right, let's go to shallow water. Okay, now I know a lot of you guys are fishing ponds. I know a lot of you guys are fishing from shore. I know a lot of you guys are fishing in the South. You made wise choices. You're living places like Florida or Texas, or even places here in Arizona where, you know, deep water might be 8 foot or 10 foot. You know, the fish are laying in shallower water. There's also a lot of times, especially like up north, you guys in Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, you know, once that ice kind of thaws and that water is super cold, a lot of times those smallmouth will move up really shallow and just soak up sun, right? So it can be shallow water, north, south, whatever. I'm gonna talk about a couple different ways that I would approach it, okay? So let's start with ponds, skinnier water. So you northern guys with your smallmouth, when those fish are kind of moving up to just kind of warm up, right? They're just soaking up some warmth, but they're not necessarily up there like chasing bait and being super active. They're pretty shy, pretty spooked, right? This would be the time that I'm gonna downsize into a smaller bait that's more finessey, more natural, a little quieter, and more lifelike, okay? So here's a couple options that I love. I'm gonna talk about 4 different baits that I've had really good success with. So up first is the X Nanahan from Megabass. Now this is one that we've been talking about all year. It's a pretty new addition. It's a 1/4 ounce bait, but you can still throw this on your 110 stick, your jerkbait special, because it's got a great casting system in it. What's dope about this is that it's designed to have the same movement as a 110. So it's going to give you that same action that you're used to in a 110, but in a true downsized bait. Another great option is the OSP Asura. So this is a thinner bait, got 3 hooks. So if they're just lightly kind of sucking or tapping at it, that 3 hooks is nice because it gives you a whole extra hook and smaller hooks to fit onto the fish or in the mouth. So those would be great options. A staple for us out here has always been the Daiwa TD Minnow. Okay, so this is a great one also. It's a longer, skinnier bait. Doesn't get talked about a lot. It's kind of a slept-on bait. 15 years ago, this is all everybody talked about. But it was kind of lost and forgotten, but guys haven't stopped throwing and the fish haven't stopped eating it. So it might be a good one if you're not hearing a lot of talk about it, then there's probably not a lot of fish seeing it where you guys are. But it's a really good one. You can fish it very quick, but it's a great one for cold water, twitch, and then just let it pause and suspend there. And they got some dope colors. You might have to go more natural. And if you're fishing really clear water, you might have to go with more transparent, like a ghost minnow, something like that, instead of my traditional, you know, white matte dark. So don't be afraid to mix in here a ghost minnow. A GP Pro Blue is an amazing clear water shallow color as well, okay? The other one that can be really good is the Rozante 77. Okay, so there's 4 different kind of finesse options that you can just fish. And again, same kind of retrieve. You're gonna kind of jerk and then let it really marinate down there and let those fish get a good look at it, and boom, you got them, okay? Now, the other type of shallow water fishing is gonna be heavier line, thicker vegetation. So if you guys are fishing a lake full of grass, full of reeds, and big fish, maybe full of stumps, full of wood, if you're down in Texas, Florida, you're not gonna be throwing these tiny little wussy baits on 6-pound and fairy wands, right? You need something that you could throw 14-pound, 16-pound line on, but you can still fish it the same way. The metabolism of the fish is still slow, so you're still not gonna want something that's gonna work really fast, but you need something that's capable of giving a good movement and a good suspend on heavier line. When it comes to that, I pretty much live in the OSP Varuna and the OSP Rudra. I know I picked the wrong things at the wrong time, but the Varuna and Rudra is where I live when I need to go heavier line, okay? I love both of these jerk baits. They are designed to give kind of a similar action, I would say, as a 110, maybe kind of an in-between a 110 and a Pointer 100, but they're designed in a way to where you can fish them on heavier line and you can be really, really aggressive with the movements. So don't be afraid to just, you know, boom, boom, hit it hard. And this bait's got the way the lip is shaped, it's a little bit thicker. It will react really well to a hard movement, and then it just chills in suspense, okay? So, you know, if you tried to fish 14 or 16 pound line and a hard movement to the 110, it's just the line's gonna wrap, you're not gonna get any movement, the bait's just gonna kind of come up. These were designed for that, okay? So, I think if you guys would try them and add them into your lineup, you'd find that you're gonna catch a ton of fish. The way I choose between Varuna or Rudra is just size. So Rudra's 130, the Varuna's 110. So if I need something bigger, then I'll go Rudra. If I need something more finessey, I'll go Varuna, okay? The only other one I really mess with this time of the year in shallow water is the Kanata from Megabass. Now, we've talked about the Kanata quite a few times. It is a high floating jerkbait, okay? So it is going to float like a cork when you pause this thing. But this is one of the easiest jerkbaits in the world to modify. So literally I will get 1 gram weight strips. I start with 1 gram right behind the front hook and I see if it suspends. If it doesn't, I let that front hook dangle and I put 1 gram on this side of the hook, and then almost every time it perfectly suspends. What I love about this is because it's so high float, when it's suspending, it's wanting, that weight is almost forcing the bait to move side to side because the top of the bait's wanting to pull it, the weight's wanting to pull it, and so it almost forces it to have this like little shimmy while it stops. So you get this movement and then it just kind of sits in place and shimmies and moves side to side, and it's an amazing trigger if you can get it, especially like right next to a stump, or like rip it out of grass and it's just shimmying in a hole like, oh shit, I'm in this opening. It's a really cool one to try. So if they're eating bigger bait, you know, gizzards, shiners, that kind of stuff, this might be a super effective shallow tool as well. All right, guys, that is a wrap. I hope that was useful and maybe give you some starting points to, you know, just get you out there and to understand the arsenal that you guys have in your box, when to use what, and maybe some cadence in how to go jack them in the cold weather. But if you have questions on anything that we didn't cover, whether it's colors or baits or riggings or whatever, please drop them down below. I would love to get whatever info I can to you. And if there's something that's working for you guys that I didn't mention that you want to share with everybody, please drop that down below as well, because I want us all to collectively learn and grow together so we can catch a bunch of fish this winter. So on behalf of myself and Jeff and everybody here at the Hookup Tackle Guys, thank you for giving us time. Thank you for your business, and go catch some big fish on a jerkbait. We'll see you soon. Peace.